Good afternoon. One reason not to trust technology, what happened is that I thought I saved my presentation for today on the flash stick, but it didn't save. So what I'm going to be doing today is an improvised performance. But the advantage of doing something over and over and over again is like, it's always on the fingertips. Today I'm going to be talking more about metals and metal production in sub-Saharan Africa. So Africa south of the Egyptian pyramids, covering West Africa, Central Africa, East Africa, as well as Southern Africa. But before I do that, I have a story that you might be interested in. And the story, legend has it that it happened in the year 1916 in Germany. That is the time when Max Planck got a Nobel Prize for physics. So legend has it that upon getting such a very prestigious honor, Professor Planck had a tour of different institutions, including universities in Germany. So talking about the subject of his Nobel Prize. So after about 12 or so lectures, he was visibly tired. And the venue of that talk was Munich. So his personal driver said, "But Professor Planck, you look so tired, and I don't think that you are in a position to be giving this lecture. Above all, I've listened to you so many times. So don't you think that it's a good idea if I just dress up as you? And then just present. After all, I know your gestures." So Max agreed. And then the chauffeur gave a very, very wonderful lecture, except that there was one problem. One of the members of the audience asked a very interesting and very, very difficult question. So the driver wouldn't know how to answer it and said, you know what? One of the easiest questions I have ever had, I will ask my driver in the audience to answer it. And that directed the question to the professor himself. Anyway, back to West Africa. So the metallurgy of West Africa, or sub-Saharan Africa, is very interesting in the sense that it directly contrasts with the picture that we saw in Egypt and North Africa. So in sub-Saharan Africa, metallurgy began with the working of iron and copper, but there is one challenge. In the region of Mauritania, which is next to Morocco, because Morocco also had influence from North Africa, there is some copper and some bronze. But so far, archaeologists have not found the evidence to link the two. So the generally accepted fact is that as long as you are in Africa south of the Sahara, then the picture that you have is that the technology starts with iron and then copper. So when does bronze appear, particularly in West Africa? Bronze and gold, their appearance is associated with the development of the links between West Africa and North Africa via the Sahara trade route. Then the question is, when do archaeologists begin to see the interlinkages between, or the connections between North Africa and West Africa, particularly the regions of West Africa such as Niger, which shares the border with Algeria, and countries such as Libya. So across the Sahara Desert, what evidence do we actually see some of the earliest evidence that potentially indicate connection between North Africa and West Africa is the rock art of the Sahara Desert. So David Mattingly and colleagues, they have done a significant amount of work which demonstrates that there were connections. But intensified trade networks, they do appear around AD 300. There is an archaeological site known as Kisi, which is in the modern day Burkina Faso. The German team led by Sonia Magnavita, Peter Browning, and others, they found a significant amount of material culture, such as glass beads, that are Roman in nature. And their thinking is that obviously they had to be sourced from North Africa through the Sahara trade. But gold does not appear at that time, at least on the basis of current archaeological evidence. Gold and bronze appear around AD 700 or 800. So this piece here is an earring which was excavated by Rod McIntosh and Susan McIntosh at the archaeological site of Gene in modern-day Mali. So this, on the basis of current evidence, is regarded as Africa's, Sub-Saharan Africa's earliest known earring. I also didn't believe it at first. But what is interesting is that the typology of this object, I don't know if any of us have ever read Andy Garrett's book on the gold of Africa, which was published by the Gold Museum in Cape Town and in association with the Babia Mula Museum. These earrings are closely related to the ones that are produced in modern-day Morocco, as well as the ones that are still being produced in modern-day Senegal. So the understanding is that the working of gold as well as bronze took place as a result of the stimulus from the trans-Saharan trade. So one of the most interesting but unanswered questions comes from lead isotope analysis that were done on some of the copper objects from Kisi in Burkina Faso. So the German team that did that work, they concluded that some of the objects from Burkina Faso dating to around AD 300, the geochemistry matched that of some of the sources on the Sahara. So the question then is, if trade started around AD 300, why then is it that we don't see evidence of gold and bronze in the intervening period? It could be that the evidence is there, but has not yet been found. But then that takes us into the domain of speculation. So after the gold working was established, we know that there was a very thriving industry bordered on gold production, and that around AD 800, 900, resulted in the rise of what is known as the Empire of Ghana. No relationship to the modern-day state of Ghana. The Empire of Ghana was situated in the modern-day Mauritania. So with its capital based at a place known as Kumbisale, again in the modern-day Mauritania, the Empire of Ghana controlled most of the gold production that took place on the headwaters of the Senegal River. And that gold was produced using some of the techniques that we mentioned, alluvial gold mining, as well as some open mining and underground mining. What is also interesting about West African gold production is that much later, around the 14th, 15th century, let's not forget that if we move to the Atlantic coast, there is Ghana, where there is this place known as the Gold Coast. So Gold Coast for a reason, because that was well known for its gold. And the Akan gold production, Akan people produced these interesting crocodiles, which were used as handles for swords, particularly the ones which the elite in society, the kings and the rulers. So the sword would connect from this side, and then this would then be a symbol of status. There is actually quite a lot of Akan gold objects which were produced using that technique of lost cast wax, lost wax casting. I beg your pardon. This object was also produced using the same technique. Archaeologists speculate what was the function of this is just known as a gold medallion from an archaeological site of Rao, R-A-O, in Senegal. And the archaeological context dates to around 1500 AD. And as you can see, it was, it's an amazing piece of work, which, again, archaeologists believe was produced using the lost wax technique. This is the story as far as gold is concerned, particularly its association with long-distance trade. And the story that one sees in West Africa is that gold production is associated with the rise and fall of empires. I mentioned ancient Ghana. Ghana was succeeded by the Empire of Mali around AD 1312 or thereabout. And Mali controlled the trade routes of all the gold and was involved strongly in the trans-Saharan trade. So one of the most well-known stories is of that leader known as Mansa Musa, who went on a pilgrimage from ancient Mali, still at the same region of Mauritania or thereabout, Mauritania, modern-day Mali. He is believed to have taken with him a significant amount of gold, to the extent that when he went to Cairo, the gold stock market crashed. But the sad part of the same story is that he also went on a very extravagant spending spree, that he had to have some of the bankers in Cairo accompany him to Mali so that they can get some gold to pay off some of the debts. And some of those bankers, legend has it that some of them, they could not make it across the Sahara. So Mansa Musa, that is why also Mali's reputation in the Islamic world as a source of gold, that is where it is also coming from, particularly from Mansa Musa's pilgrimage. After that, there is the Empire of Songhai, which is also controlling trade, gold trade, involving particularly the trans-Saharan trade in gold. But shortly after Songhai's collapse, around 1500 or thereabout, that is when that Atlantic trade had started to boom. That is when the modern-day Ghana area, what is known as the Gold Coast, became a principal source of gold, particularly going to Europe. There is still some trade activity through the Sahara at this point in time. But the story of metals in West Africa is not complete until we consider an archaeological site that was discovered by Thurston Shaw in modern-day Nigeria, and that is the archaeological site of Igbo Uku. So Igbo Uku, dating between roughly AD 800, 900 to 1200, it's situated in the southeast of Nigeria. So the easiest geographical reference is the modern-day Niger Delta. So that just up that Niger Delta area, that is where Igbo Uku is. So Igbo Uku yielded some very stunning pieces of metalwork that were made of tin bronzes, arsenical bronzes, and some of them were made of pure copper. In addition to that, Thurston Shaw also recovered more than 12,000 glass beads. And those 12,000 glass beads, and the time period that we are talking about, as I said, is AD 800 to 1200. The glass beads, their chemical composition was studied by Pete Robert Shaw and colleagues. And they realized that the recipe that was used to make the glass beads, as well as the source of the raw materials, was the same or is the same as the recipe that was used to manufacture what in Southern Africa we call Gizo glass beads. So Gizo, which is an archaeological site in the Matopos of Zimbabwe, but in South Africa is represented by the site of Schroeder. So those of us who have been to Mapungubwe, there is that site of Schroeder next to Schroeder Dam. The glass beads from that site, and they've also been recovered in East Africa. They are the same in terms of typology as well as in terms of chemical composition. They are the same as the ones that were recovered at Igbo Uku in Nigeria. So the source of the glass beads is believed to have been Fustat, which is next to near historic or modern day Cairo. So what this speaks to is the existence of a very, very big network. We can speculate, did the Nigerians had contact with the people in Southern Africa or not, but it doesn't make sense, because the easiest option would be that the Nigerians would have traded perhaps through the Lake Chad area into the Sahara towards Egypt. And then in Southern Africa, we know that, of course, the commercial traffic originated at the Indian Ocean coast, inland, and then back to the coast. But it just does show that all these areas were interlinked. So the Igbo Uku bronzes, they were cast again using the technique of lost wax casting, and there is also some of the very earliest evidence of wire drawing in Africa. So wire drawing, again, is a technique that is associated with the Islamic world. It's not believed to be indigenous to Africa. So, but in as much as there is that evidence of external contribution, external interaction at Igbo Uku, the compositional studies that were done on the Igbo Uku bronzes by a team based at the British Museum, it suggested that the tin that was used to manufacture the bronzes was sourced locally in Nigeria, on the near the Jos, what is known as the Jos Plateau. And also the copper was also sourced locally. So in as much as there might be an external stimuli to that bronze working industry, the raw materials are all very, very much local. This has generated a great deal of a debate and controversy amongst researchers. Are they local or are they external? So based on the latest lead isotope data, which indicates that the tin is local as well as the copper is local. So some archaeologists tend to think that that was a local development. Yesterday, somebody asked about the Benin bronzes, and it's a pity that I don't have the photos now, but I will show them. I will show them tomorrow. So the Benin bronzes, the techniques of metalworking that were invested in the Igbo Uku bronzes are exactly the same as the ones that were invested into the making of the later Benin bronzes. The only difference is that with the Benin, the so-called Benin bronzes, in as much as some earlier analysis indicated that they were made of bronze, they are actually made of brass. And brass was indeed one of the major exports from Europe to Nigeria. There is that classic paper which was written by the anthropologist Bohannan in 1955, which discusses the importance of the brass trade in what he calls the sphere of trade amongst the Tiv of northeastern Nigeria. So the Benin bronzes, the Paul Craddock, as well as his colleague by the name of Chikwendu, they studied the chemical composition of most of those Benin bronzes, particularly the ones that are at the British Museum, and concluded that they were brasses. Some of them, they were used as reliefs to decorate the palaces. Some of them were used to commemorate the different leaders. Some, and yet others, were used to produce different shapes. Some of the common or some of the best pieces, they do represent even animals like leopards. I've also seen one which looks like a fish and so on. So these artworks, they are distributed in most most museums in the world. So the Ethnographic Museum in Berlin, it has quite a very extensive collection. The Smithsonian and in the other places. So the most interesting thing is that as a result of interaction, we clearly see that the locals are borrowing either the ideas to make materials or the materials themselves. And then in some cases, they are making innovations to suit the different local contexts. So the Benin bronzes, they also have their equivalent in terracotta as well as in ivory. So when the Portuguese first came to West Africa, some of the local people in Nigeria, modern-day Nigeria, and modern-day Ghana made some artworks that are meant to represent the Portuguese. And some of those artworks made in ivory, they date to around the 1400s as well as the 1600s. Some of the most vintage pieces, they are in places such as the Smithsonian. So how about iron, which is the metal which was used for everyday use? So the story of iron does differ a little bit to that of the precious and semi-precious metals, such as copper and gold. Iron was widely available, and as we saw in that video yesterday, iron could be produced either in what were known as natural draft furnaces, so sucking furnaces that sucked the air using the chimney effect, or furnaces that used the the bellows. On the basis of current archaeological evidence, we do not know what furnace type was the earliest. Of the 3 iron smelting furnace types, the bowl furnaces, the shaft furnaces, as well as those tall natural draft furnaces, which are also a variant of shaft furnaces. So we haven't found any evidence that can be used to say perhaps this was the earliest or this was the latest. The distribution of those furnace types in West Africa and beyond seem to suggest that different furnace types were used by related groups as well as by different groups. But what is interesting about West Africa and particularly the Dogon region, which is the site of the video that we saw yesterday, is that there was very intensive production of iron. In the Bassa region of Togo, Phil Baroche and colleagues at the University of California, San Bernardino, they have done some quantitative estimates of the actual production that could have taken place in that region. And in one estimate, they believe that they found huge slag mounds that can approximate more than 160,000 tons of waste. So if we can try to unpack that figure a little bit, what does it translate into the actual production? So I may have mentioned one of the days that the technology of producing iron traditionally was known as the bloomery production, which involved the solid state reduction of iron ore using carbon monoxide. So it was also a self-fluxing process, so no limestone was used. But what then happened was that the fuel ash, which is rich in lime, which is rich in calcium, it also performed a fluxing role together with the impurities in the ore, as well as the melting furnace wall. So that was the flux. It was a self-fluxing process. So after some hours of combustion, reduction was initiated, resulting in the process of a solid mass of iron and waste product known as slag. So the beauty of that process is that because it was a high temperature process, it has a record of some of the processes, particularly the physical-chemical processes that were taking place in the furnaces. So the beauty of that is that if one is to use techniques from material science, techniques from geology, they can reconstruct the technology. They can also estimate the temperatures that were reached in the furnaces. So you can get, so if you analyze the slag using X-ray fluorescence, for example, and then you could plot the resulting data on ternary diagrams with their obvious limitations, but then you can also approximate that perhaps the temperatures in this furnace reached that much or reached that much. But the point that I want to make is not so much at a technical level. It relates to how efficient was that process. So in most cases, and based on the analysis that were done, it appears as if between 50 to 60% weight of the iron oxide was retained in the slag, which also meant that the balance was converted to metal. So the metal recovery was, if we may use a rough calculation, was almost 1-to-1. One part would go to one half would go to the slag, and the other half could be converted to metal. So if we then go back to Phil Baroche as example, at Basa, we can clearly say of the 160,000 tons that he is talking about, then there is also a corresponding 160,000 tons of iron that were produced. Where did the iron go? That could be the next question. So what it would mean is that, according to them, there was a very vibrant trade involving iron across much of West Africa. So the German team that moving a little bit from Togo to Cameroon, but with the intention of emphasizing the same point, the German team that worked in the Cameroon grass fields also documented such a large-scale production. But they said that the iron which was produced in that area was used to fuel the slave trade. So the iron was used to make shackles, to make other objects, chains, that were used by the slave traders, particularly in the area of modern Nigeria, where the historical state of Bonu was situated. So one of the things that we also have to realize is that the slave trade, there was the transatlantic, there was the trans-Saharan one, but there was also one that was internal to Africa. So the internal African slave trade, that is the one which which is believed to have consumed all that iron which was produced in different types of production centers. So our knowledge is also conditioned by the amount of research. So there are gaps. We have the Dogon region of Mali. We also have the Senegal River area. We have Togo, and then we go to Cameroon. In between, we don't know what was happening. But the speculation is that some of perhaps there was also trade, and given the widespread availability of iron, perhaps there was also some localized production. If we are to look at the technology, I mentioned that the technology of producing iron in West Africa was the bloomery process, but the products from the smelting, they varied from area to area. So in some cases, depending on the fuel to air ratio that was maintained during smelting, they could produce blooms that had elevated amounts of carbon, which would make them steel. But some of that carbon was also lost during the subsequent process of consolidation and cleaning out of the bloom. So because the process of smithing was oxidizing, so some of the carbon could be left. But in the Cameroon area, what is a region that is known as the Mandara Mountains, the smelters, they used what are known as the downdraft furnaces, which used a single tuye. And the furnace was built on an elevated place, and with a tuye that could be as long as 1.2 meters. So that the melting away of that tuye could contribute to a slag formation. The ore that was smelted in those downdraft furnaces was magnetite sands, which were panned from the river sands, basically. So mostly women who would pan those magnetite sands, and then they were smelted in those furnaces. But the result from those furnaces was mostly cast iron, and which is something that is quite interesting, given that cast iron is not normally associated with those bloomery processes. That cast iron was decarburized, or it was worked to reduce excess carbon in smaller crucibles, and then was used to manufacture a wide variety of items, one of which is the throwing knife. So there are those throwing knives that are quite popular in from Central Africa to West Africa, and even extending to the Sudan and Ethiopia. I had some nice photographs of those, but I will show them. I'll show them tomorrow. So those throwing knives, which were also used in combat, which were used as a sign of status by men of a different age, they were one of the products. So one of the most interesting things about those throwing knives is that sometimes they could forge weld pieces of steel with pieces of soft iron. And you can clearly see that when you cut a metallographic section. You can get a typical microstructure of a steel, and you could also get a typical microstructure of normal soft iron. So one of the projects that I'm working on at the moment, it is an exhibition of artworks made of iron from at least 36 African countries. So we do have a collection of over 1,000 throwing knives. And note that we will just select a few, and the exhibition is going to tour a number of institutions, but it will start at the Fowler Museum at the University of California, Los Angeles. Then it will go to the Smithsonian. It will also go to the British Museum, amongst other places. We tried to bring it to Cape Town, but then they don't have the space. It requires at least 6,000 square meters of space. So some of the objects coming out of those Cameroonian metal smiths who produced those throwing knives includes the gongs, which were used to produce music. So you can have some are double gongs, some appear as single, and then even today they are still being used. So there is some pattern that you can hit them to produce some nice acoustics. So those ones, we also have archaeological evidence for them. And what is also interesting is the fact that some of those double gongs, I know of at least 3 or 4 pairs that were recovered from Great Zimbabwe. So 2 of those are at Iziko Museum on the display. So the Great Zimbabwe ones are the only known. In the recent past, we have no record of those double gongs having been used. So that is where the thinking that Great Zimbabwe was widely networked with the communities in Central Africa comes from. It's because of those double gongs. But those double gongs actually, they are indeed a very important and principal feature of the metallurgy of West Africa. So what were the double gongs, or what were the gongs used for? To make music, but it is also believed that they were associated with the palaces as well as with the kings. In 1969, Jan van Zina wrote a paper entitled Bells for the King, in which he talks about how those iron gongs were used to make music for the ruling classes. So the distribution, as I said, West Africa to perhaps the Zambezi River. The only archaeological example we have is from Great Zimbabwe. After that, we don't have anything. And of course, after that, the other objects that were also manufactured include the spears, and those ones they also had quite a widespread use, either as a status symbol. Most men in different communities, they had to move around with a spear. But those spears were also used in combat. So if we go back to regions such as Mali, there were also some gunsmiths, particularly from the 15th, 16th, and 17th century onwards. So iron was traditionally produced iron was used either to manufacture sheet metal, which was used to repair guns. So the iron had quite, and in fact, there are some colorful historical figures, such as Samori Touré, who was in charge of the Mandingo Empire in somewhere around modern day Mali or thereabout. He is reputed to have maintained workshops where a number of metal workers would produce iron, which was used by his gunsmiths. The other use of particularly for iron, just like copper and gold, was that it was also either hammered into a wire, which was then used to make bracelets, and in some cases it was also drawn to produce through those wire draw plates to produce some very thin wire. So the process of wire drawing, both for non-ferrous metals as well as for iron, it involved just starting with a very thin bar, which was then drawn through a series of holes of different diameters, which were in a droplet. I will show an example of that tomorrow. So the process then involved just pulling the wire through with some form of a pincers until the smallest gauge was reached. And then that resulted in the production of very thin wire. Those who have been to places such as Mapungubwe, there are some bangles that are on display, which seem to have been made of very nice, nicely made wire, which was wound around a vegetal core or a material of the sort. So it is also believed that that wire was manufactured through the drawing process. What is interesting is that if we compare Southern Africa with West Africa, we realize that barring the Igbo Uku example that I mentioned, wire drawing is mostly a feature of Southern and East Africa. Why that difference, I am not so sure. But most of the studies seem to indicate that. Some of the possible explanations that have been advanced include the impact of the Swahili traders and the Arabs, but then a counter argument could be that, but also West Africa also had those contacts and connections. So why is it that technology did not filter through to West Africa? That is an unanswered question. Then the other issue of interest is, did Africans of the pre-colonial period, did they intentionally produce steel or not? That is a question that is very difficult to answer. So metallographic analysis of objects from a wide variety of areas appear to be inconclusive. But there is one case along the coast, the Indian Ocean coast of East Africa, particularly at places such as Kilwa, where it appears as if the inhabitants of the place were working crucible steel. So crucible steel, which some archaeologists believe that perhaps it was imported from India, because there are those swords that are known as the Damascus swords. Those are quite prominent in the Old World. By Old World, I mean most of Africa, the Middle East, Europe, India, all with the rest of the world, with the exclusion of Australia and the Americas. So those Damascus swords had a huge popularity and prestige. So the studies by David Killick and Chap Kusimba on some of the iron objects from Swahili sites seem to indicate that the Swahili were working at that crucible steel, and then in some cases they also used those Damascus swords. But the big question is that did they locally produce crucible steel, or they only worked imported material? So on the basis of current evidence, there is no conclusion to that matter. It is now quite, maybe ridiculous is the wrong word, but what has happened is that two colleagues started working together, but then when it came to interpreting the data, the other one said, no, the Swahili were producing crucible steel locally. The other one said, no, they were working imported metal. And then they fell out big time. So what then happened is that there is a paper which says, there's an academic paper which says that the Swahili were producing crucible steel. And then there's also another one which says that the Swahili were not producing crucible steel. Whether it's egos or what, I don't know. Then, of course, the significance of iron metallurgy, the significance of copper metallurgy, as well as gold, cannot be understood if we do not try to understand the position of those metals in society. So, one of the things that we don't have an explanation of is that in Southern Africa, it appears as if copper was more important when compared to gold, such that there are some Portuguese reports that of the area around modern-day northern Zimbabwe, where they are saying that the local people appear to be uninterested in the gold at all. They said that they want to trade all of it. But then they were interested in the copper. And they say that the copper is the red gold of Africa. That is the title of Eugenia Herbert's book. But if you go to West Africa, particularly amongst the Akan people of Ghana and related communities, you also realize that gold is very important. It's a symbol of status. So amongst the Asante of Ghana, one of the important objects in their kingship is an artifact that is known as a golden stool. So the Asante golden stool is quite significant. So there are those contrasts and perhaps